Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. We have all seen the giants, the towering long necks, the armored tanks, the horned bulldozers, the predators with teeth like steak knives. And honestly, we may be a little tired of dinosaurs that shake the ground every time they take a step. So today, we are going in the opposite direction. We are shrinking the Mesozoic world down to the size of a chicken, or even smaller. Because not every dinosaur was a mountain of muscle and bone. Some were tiny runners, tiny climbers, tiny hunters, tiny feathered shadows that could have vanished behind a house cat. Imagine a dinosaur so small it could stand beside a modern chicken and not look impressive at all. Imagine one light enough to perch on your hand like a pigeon. Imagine a predator that might have looked dangerous to a lizard but not very scary to your average backyard rooster. That is the world we are exploring today, the smallest dinosaurs ever discovered. And to make their size clear, we will compare each one with familiar animals from our modern world. A chicken, a crow, a rabbit, a squirrel, a pigeon, even a hummingbird. So let us step away from the giants and meet the dinosaurs that prove small can still be fascinating. First on our list is Compsognathus. For a long time, Compsognathus was one of the most famous tiny dinosaurs in the world. Its name means elegant jaw, and it lived in late Jurassic Europe. When people imagine it today, they often picture a small, fast predator about the size of a chicken. In reality, some specimens were closer to a turkey in length because of the long tail. But the body itself was still very small. Think of a lean chicken stretched out with a long balancing tail and a narrow head full of tiny sharp teeth. If it stood next to a modern hen, its body height would not feel like a monster at all. It would feel more like a quick, nervous bird with teeth. Compsognathus probably hunted small animals, lizards, insects, and other bite-sized prey. One fossil even preserved a small lizard inside its body cavity. That detail gives us a vivid picture. This was not a dinosaur that chased buses or smashed trees. This was a little hunter working at ground level, more like a roadrunner chasing a lizard across dry soil. Fast, alert, light on its feet, and perfectly built for a world where survival did not always depend on being huge. Next is Microraptor, and this one is extraordinary. Microraptor lived in early Cretaceous China, and it was roughly the size of a crow or a small pigeon hawk. Now picture a crow in your neighborhood, not a giant bird, not something you fear, just a sleek black bird hopping across a fence or gliding from a tree. That gives you a surprisingly good sense of Microraptor's scale. But unlike a crow, Microraptor had teeth, clawed hands, a long tail, and feathers on both its arms and legs. That is why people often describe it as a four-winged dinosaur. Its long feathers formed aerodynamic surfaces on the front limbs and the hind limbs. If you saw one moving through a forest, it might not look like a classic reptilian dinosaur at all. It might look like a strange dark bird from a dream. Only when it landed close would you notice the toothed jaws and grasping claws. Compared with a chicken, Microraptor would seem lighter and more agile, less like a barnyard bird, more like a crow crossed with a tiny climbing predator. It was small enough to move through branches, glide between trees, and snatch small prey that a bigger dinosaur could never reach. Now let us talk about Anchiornis. Anchiornis was another feathered dinosaur from Jurassic China, and it was truly tiny by dinosaur standards. Its body size was similar to a modern chicken, or even a large pigeon. If you placed Anchiornis beside a backyard hen, the hen might look just as bulky, maybe even more solid. Anchiornis had long feathers on its arms and legs, and researchers have even studied fossilized pigment structures to understand its possible coloration. It may have had black and white patterning with a reddish crest on the head. That makes it easier to imagine as a living animal. Not a monster, but a delicate feathered creature moving through ancient forests. Think of a fancy bantam chicken with longer limbs, a long tail, claws on the hands, and a much more wild expression. It was not built like a massive predator. It was built like a small active animal that needed speed, balance, and camouflage. Its size reminds us that many dinosaurs were close to birds long before modern birds ruled the skies. Anchiornis looks like a snapshot from the evolutionary bridge between ground-running dinosaurs and flight-capable birds. And that bridge was not built by giants. It was built by animals small enough to hide under a shrub. Another tiny dinosaur is Parvicursor. The name itself means small runner. And that is exactly the image you should have in mind. Parvicursor came from late Cretaceous Mongolia. It belonged to a group called Alvarezsaurids. These dinosaurs were small, fast, and strangely specialized. Parvicursor may have been only about the size of a modern quail or bantam chicken. Imagine something smaller than the chickens most people see on farms. Closer to a plump quail darting through dry grass. But with a dinosaur tail and unusual little arms, Alvarezsaurids often had powerful forelimbs with a single enlarged claw. Some scientists think they may have used those claws to break into insect nests. If that idea is right, Parvicursor might have lived a little like a modern anteater crossed with a tiny roadrunner. It was not intimidating because of size. It was impressive because of specialization. A huge predator could crush prey with jaws, but a tiny dinosaur like Parvicursor had to survive with precision. It had to find food that others missed. It had to sprint away from danger. And it had to fit into ecological spaces too small for giants. In a world of massive animals, this little runner had its own quiet advantage. Then we have Shuvuuia. Shuvuuia also lived in Mongolia, and it was another small Alvarezsaurid. Its size was close to a chicken, maybe a little bigger in total length because of the tail, but its body would still feel very small beside a person. Think of a skinny chicken with a long tail, long legs, a narrow skull, and tiny but strong arms ending in one serious claw. That is the basic impression. Shuvuuia is especially interesting because evidence suggests it may have had excellent night vision and strong hearing. If that is correct, this little dinosaur may have been a nocturnal specialist. Picture a modern owl in terms of nighttime ability, but replace the wings with running legs and digging claws. At night, when larger dinosaurs were resting or moving slowly in the darkness, Shuvuuia may have searched for insects and small animals. It could have listened carefully, tracked movement, and used its claw to tear into hiding places. Compared with a modern chicken, it was likely far more agile and far more predatory. Not a barnyard scratcher, but a night-roaming insect hunter. Small enough to be ignored in many dinosaur documentaries, yet perfectly designed for its own shadowy niche. Now let us meet Epidexipteryx. This dinosaur was about the size of a pigeon or small crow. It lived in Jurassic China, and it had one of the most unusual looks among tiny dinosaurs. Its body was small, but it had long ribbon-like tail feathers that probably served for display. Imagine a pigeon-sized animal standing on a branch. Then imagine it with a dinosaur face, clawed fingers, a short body, and elegant ornamental feathers trailing behind it. That is not the image of a terrifying monster. That is the image of a delicate forest creature competing for attention. Maybe it used those feathers to signal to mates, maybe to intimidate rivals, maybe to show health and strength. Modern birds do this all the time. Peacocks use huge tails. Birds of paradise use impossible shapes and colors. Even tiny hummingbirds flash iridescent feathers like living jewels. Epidexipteryx reminds us that display did not begin with modern birds. Dinosaurs were already experimenting with beauty, color, and visual drama, and they were doing it at a scale that would fit comfortably beside a city pigeon. In a world filled with giants, this little dinosaur may have stood out not by being large, but by being beautiful. Another small dinosaur worth knowing is Yichi. Its name is short, but the animal is unforgettable. Yichi lived in Jurassic China, and it was roughly the size of a pigeon or small chicken. But it had a bizarre feature. It appears to have supported a membrane wing with an elongated rod-like bone. That makes it look less like a typical bird and more like a strange dinosaur version of a bat. To picture it, start with a pigeon-sized feathered dinosaur. Add clawed hands, add a long tail, then add membranous wings, unlike anything you expect from a normal bird. The result is one of the weirdest small dinosaurs ever found. Compared with a modern chicken, Yichi would seem lighter, more fragile, and far more unusual. Compared with a bat, it might share the idea of a skin membrane for gliding. But it was still a dinosaur, not a mammal, not a bird in the modern sense. A strange side experiment in flight and gliding. Yichi shows us that evolution was not a straight road. It was a forest of experiments, some successful, some temporary, some so strange that a fossil feels like science fiction. And this experiment was happening in an animal small enough to perch on a branch above your head. Let us move to Mahakala. Mahakala was a small dromaeosaur from Mongolia, a relative of the famous raptors. But instead of being human-sized like the movie monsters people imagine, Mahakala was much smaller, closer in body size to a chicken or a large crow. Think about that for a moment. The raptor family is often represented by terrifying pack hunters, but one of its early relatives was small enough that a modern goose might look more intimidating. Mahakala had the basic tools of a predator: sharp teeth, grasping limbs, a balancing tail, and likely feathers. But it operated on a miniature scale. If Velociraptor was like a dangerous turkey-sized predator, Mahakala was even more modest in size, more like a feathered hunter you might compare to a hawk on the ground. Its importance is not just its smallness. It helps scientists understand that small body size may have been important near the base of the bird like dinosaur family tree. In other words, bird evolution was closely connected with shrinking bodies, lighter frames, feathers, and agile movement. Mahakala was not a giant trying to become a bird. It was already small, already quick, already part of the story that would eventually lead to the birds outside your window today. Now we come to Oculudentavis. This one is controversial, and it needs to be handled carefully. When first described, Oculudentavis was presented as possibly the smallest known dinosaur from the age of dinosaurs. Its skull was preserved in amber from Myanmar, and the skull was tiny. So tiny that people compared the animal to a modern hummingbird. Imagine a dinosaur with a head small enough to fit near the scale of the tiniest living birds. That would be astonishing. However, later research raised serious questions about whether Oculudentavis was actually a bird-like dinosaur or instead a very unusual lizard. So why include it here? Because it is a perfect reminder that paleontology changes when new evidence appears. The first impression was a hummingbird-sized dinosaur, but the debate showed that tiny fossils can be difficult to interpret. When an animal is that small, every bone matters. Every angle matters. And amber preservation can reveal details while also creating confusion. So we should not treat Oculudentavis as a confirmed tiny dinosaur in the same way as Microraptor or Anchiornis. But we can still use it to understand the edge of possibility. The Mesozoic world may have included animals approaching the size of hummingbirds, and that idea alone changes how we imagine dinosaur ecosystems. Not just giants in the distance, but tiny creatures in the leaves. Another important name is Hesperonychus. Hesperonychus lived in late Cretaceous North America, and it was a small relative of the raptors. Compared with the massive dinosaurs sharing its environment, it was tiny, roughly the size of a small chicken or a large crow in body mass estimates. Imagine walking through a Cretaceous floodplain where huge duck-billed dinosaurs move like living buses. Where horned dinosaurs graze like armored rhinos. Where tyrannosaurs dominate the food chain, and then near your feet, a little feathered predator darts through the plants. That could be Hesperonychus. It would not challenge a triceratops. It would not roar like a movie monster. It would hunt insects, small reptiles, pop mammals, and any prey it could overpower. In modern terms, Think of a sharp-eyed crow-sized hunter with the confidence of a weasel. Small predators can be fierce because they live fast lives. They need food constantly. They cannot rely on bulk, so they rely on speed, stealth, and quick strikes. Hesperonychus proves that even in ecosystems famous for giants, there was still room for feathered mini predators running between the feet of legends. Finally, let us talk about modern birds, because if we are discussing the smallest dinosaurs, we cannot ignore the living ones. Birds are dinosaurs. They are the surviving branch of our family tree. That means the smallest dinosaur alive today is not hidden in a museum drawer. It is flying in the modern world. The bee hummingbird of Cuba is often considered the smallest living bird, and therefore the smallest living dinosaur. It is barely bigger than a large insect. A chicken looks enormous beside it. A pigeon looks like an aircraft carrier. Even a sparrow seems bulky by comparison. The bee hummingbird weighs less than many coins, and yet it carries the legacy of dinosaurs in its bones. That fact is almost poetic. The age of giant dinosaurs ended with catastrophe. But the dinosaur story did not end. It became smaller, lighter, faster, more aerial, and more diverse. Today, when a hummingbird hovers near a flower, you are watching a tiny dinosaur perform a miracle of flight. When a chicken scratches the ground, you are watching a distant cousin of theropod dinosaurs move in a very ordinary backyard scene. The dinosaur world did not disappear completely. Part of it became familiar. So familiar that we sometimes forget how strange it really is. So what do these tiny dinosaurs teach us? They teach us that dinosaurs were not all giants. They were not all roaring monsters. They were not all built to crush trees or fight in cinematic battles. Some were smaller than chickens. Some were crow-sized. Some were pigeon-sized. Some may have lived like quail in the brush. Some glided like strange prehistoric shadows. Some hunted insects like tiny specialists. Some displayed feathers like miniature performers. And some helped build the evolutionary pathway toward birds. The small dinosaurs are easy to overlook because size grabs attention. But nature is never only about size. A chicken-sized predator can be just as important to its ecosystem as a giant herbivore. A pigeon-sized glider can tell us more about flight than a creature weighing tons. A quail-sized runner can reveal how evolution experiments with form and function. The next time you see a crow on a fence, a pigeon in a park, a chicken in a yard, or a hummingbird flashing past a flower, remember this. The dinosaur world was not only a world of giants, it was also a world of tiny footsteps, tiny claws, tiny feathers, and tiny hunters moving through the undergrowth. Sometimes the most amazing dinosaurs were not the ones that towered above everything. Sometimes they were the ones small enough to disappear in the grass.